Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this work session of the Washington County Board of Education. We are here this afternoon to meet to discuss and receive information regarding the superintendent's draft fiscal year 2024 budget. This is a work session, so no formal action will be taken. I would offer that questions are encouraged, but we ask that we wait until the end of the presentation for those questions and for any ensuing discussion. So all that said, I'll turn things over to Superintendent Sovine for introductions.
Thank you.
Dr. Sovine.
Yeah. Well, good afternoon, President Williams, members of the board. Over the last 6 months, it's been my honor and privilege to serve as superintendent of Washington County Public Schools. As I began my position in July, it was clear that this community has a significant number of strengths. Pride in our schools, communities that come together and support one another, and staff that are incredibly passionate, professional, and highly devoted to seeing our students succeed. This community, as a part of the superintendent selection process, also shared with me the challenges faced by Washington County. I'm a firm believer that opportunities exist with every challenge. I've really enjoyed my time becoming a part of this community, and I greatly appreciate the feedback and thoughts I've received from staff, parents, stakeholders, and most importantly, our students. I hear you, and I've had my own personal experiences as I've visited schools and attended community events. I've considered this feedback and in prioritizing my fiscal year 2024 budget. I trust you will see that I have developed a fiscally responsible financial plan that helps move Washington County Public Schools forward. You are all familiar with the budget presentation format. We will discuss our anticipated revenues from the state and the county. I will also share what I believe are the needs in terms of additional positions. As you can see here, each slide will include a ribbon mark in the upper right-hand corner, which denotes the particular line in the executive summary for your ease of reference. The slide also includes the estimated costs for the collective recommendations listed in that area. I've developed a budget with 4 key priorities in mind: addressing associated costs related to inflation, enhancing safety and security, mental health and behavior supports, providing meaningful salary initiative to attract and retain teachers, support staff, and administrators, and finally, meeting the mandates set forth in the blueprint for Maryland's future. I believe making enhancements in these areas all contribute to what we want for all of our students: greater and higher outcomes during their academic career, in their extracurricular activities, and in their pursuits beyond graduation. Historically, funding from the state has been responsible for filling any outstanding gaps in the state or in the school system's budget. At this time, it's still unclear exactly how much funding we will receive from the state, but we've been able to get a reasonable estimate, and we believe that amount will be around $22 million. In terms of the per pupil funding, Washington County has seen a slight decrease in the average student enrollment over the last 3 years. However, that decrease in enrollment has been offset by an increase in the foundation rate, providing approximately $3.6 million in additional foundational allocation. You'll also remember we shared with the board during a previous meeting that we have seen a considerable increase in students needing free and reduced meals. We have seen an increase from 47% of students on free and reduced meals last year to about 58% of students receiving free and reduced meals this school year. That's an 11% increase. As a result, we are receiving a greater amount of compensatory education funds for FY24. Once the board adopts a budget as your own, you are tasked with presenting it to the Washington County Board of Commissioners to determine what level of financial support they can provide to the budget. There is no education effort escalator in FY24. That means that Washington County government is only required to provide at least the same level of funding per student as the prior year. In order to fully fund my draft budget, WCPS will need $7.95 million from county government beyond what the Board of County Commissioners allocated for the current year, as you can see listed on this slide. Since the closing of the Fort Ritchie military base, impact aid revenue has been steadily decreasing and is more costly to qualify than the revenue is received. As a result, staff recommended eliminating the qualifying process to the Finance Committee at a previous meeting, and the committee concurred. During the current school year, I recognized areas of immediate need where additional staff would better support students. I acted on the most critical areas. We really need to address growing class sizes with a focus at the elementary level. This year, I added 3 new elementary teachers that should be included in the upcoming budget. I also believe that our students with special needs require greater support, and we've identified opportunities for special education teachers, paraprofessionals, and occupational therapists, and board-certified behavior analysts across the system. Staffing for safety and security is where you'll see the most notable requests and additional positions. We are hiring 19 school security assistants this year. They will work closely with our school resource officers and school staff to enhance safety, particularly in our middle and high schools. We will not need to fund these positions in the next fiscal year to make this initiative successful. Finally, this section also includes a budget and finance reporting analyst, which will soon be working to help us to meet the budgeting and reporting requirements of the blueprint. Washington County Public Schools has been very fortunate to receive a number of grants. Some of those were used to support specific initiatives or to fill a staffing gap where funds were not immediately available in the general fund. Because these initiatives have been so successful for our students, we will need to move these positions into the general fund for longevity and sustainability. Washington County is feeling the pain of inflation that's also being experienced across the country. We estimate that the budget will have to account for just under $2 million to continue to provide some of the services and programs our students currently receive. We cannot let these inflationary costs force us to make cuts in other areas of the budget. The needs of our students are simply too great. The cost of paper has nearly doubled, which transfers to our instructional materials. We're also seeing prices climb in technology, facilities, transportation, and safety. This budget will also have to support some of the visionary goals of the blueprint for Maryland's future legislation. This year, we started paying the tuition rates for our students to attend Hagerstown Community College or complete HCC courses as a high school student. That will continue next year, and at that time, we will also need to pay for the students' textbooks for those classes. Under Blueprint, WCPS will pay for advanced placement and international baccalaureate exams if students choose to take them, which will be another new expense for next year. Over the last year, we've also seen a considerable increase in English learners. That the student enrollment has increased quite significantly, and this was shared in previous meetings with the board, discussing in particular the Blueprint 75% funding and how it must follow students. In the area of English learners, WCPS has not kept pace with the 75% benchmark. In the upcoming fiscal year, we must catch up to this 75% threshold, which will allow us to provide the necessary supports to our English language learners. And finally, WCPS will be required to provide funding for our local workforce development board, which is the Western Maryland Consortium. That funding equates to about $62 per student, which is in the area of $1.3 million. It's to be expected that there will be increased cost for compensation and benefits. WCPS needs to keep pace with the minimum wage requirements, so we will be increasing the hourly pay for our lunch assistants. The school system also has to contribute more towards employee pensions and health insurance premiums. However, WCPS's insurance plan is still performing at a high level and beating the rate of medical inflation. Thus, I am proposing only a 3% increase while medical inflation is twice that or even more. One aspect that is beyond our control is the Time to Care Act. This legislation provides paid family and medical leave for Maryland employees. Our employees will be required to pay into this program next year, and WCPS also will have to make a contribution to the policy, which is in the amount of about $900,000 in the next fiscal year. I will emphasize again, it's imperative that we provide a meaningful salary initiative to our employees in the year ahead. Our WCPS staff is extraordinary, every single one of them, from our teachers to our administrators and support staff. Every one of them has a role that has a positive impact on students. In the midst of unparalleled changes in education over the last 2 years, our team has persevered and pulled together for the sake of our students. I am beyond grateful for all that they do each and every day. Public education has been challenged by a teacher shortage in recent years, even before the COVID pandemic. We're now experiencing shortages and staffing across the board in the areas in addition to teachers. It's also difficult to hire bus drivers who safely transport our students, paraprofessionals who provide our children with direct learning support in the classroom, specialized services providing providers like speech language pathologists and social workers. Our children deserve the best. We live in a uniquely situated area where our staff can easily find competitive career opportunities elsewhere. We must do everything we can to retain our high-quality staff and to attract the most promising prospective staff. While COVID has changed our educational environment, we have also seen that our students who left us in March of 2020 for the COVID shutdown were not the same students when they returned. Over the school closure period, many students were lacking structure. They experienced unknown amounts of trauma, and now more of our community's children need greater social emotional supports in our schools. The positions listed here on this slide and the previous slide work directly with students in schools every day. These professionals typically provide assistance to students with mental health needs or who are facing additional barriers to learning. Some of these positions also support school staff by addressing students with challenging behaviors. As you can see here on this slide, we have certainly done our due diligence in examining each of the school system's expenses. I sat down with our department heads and supervisors to identify options to reduce costs back in October. This was done through a line-by-line review of their respective budgets. Together, we identified over $2 million in savings. And this pie chart shows how the increase in this recommended budget is allocated among the priorities just mentioned. Again, this is a true needs-based budget, and I appreciate your consideration, the feedback through this process. It's my goal to operate WCPS in a proactive manner to enhance student outcomes. As I prepare to conclude this presentation, I want to express my gratitude to our team members for assisting me in this budget preparation process. In particular, I want to thank Mr. Prue, Mr. Brandenburg, Mr. Sisler, our senior leadership team in the back, and our communication team members. At this time, I'd like to turn the program over to Mr. Prue, who will provide a few highlights regarding our budget notebooks that all board members have, and certainly following his comments, I welcome any comments or questions of board members. Mr. Prue.
Thank you, Dr. Savine. Board members, as a point of clarity in terms of the binders that you have in front of you, of course, you have three tabs. One is the first is the PowerPoint presentation that Dr. Savine has just gone through. If you have questions on particular slides, there is a slide number in the bottom right-hand corner in the fine print. I suppose if your eyes are good enough, Jessica hid that down there for us. Of course, each of the slides in the top ribbon recognizes a section of the 4-page summary. It's a summary of the changes from the FY23 budget to the FY24 proposed draft. That is in the summary is in the second tab of your binders. And of course, then in your third tab is the full 41-page composite budget as proposed today. And I think with that update, I think we're ready to have some commentary and answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Prue. Dr. Savine, is it all right to go with questions? Colleagues, questions?
Well, I'll just say this, I'm amazed that we're not having to ask for more in the local allocation. I was amazed when, given the inflationary pressures and everything else, the requirements of the blueprint, I realized there's a lot of state money coming in, but I was surprised that it would be that low. And I was surprised at the inflationary cost being, what, under 2 million? I think 1.8?
Yeah.
That was the biggest surprise for me when I opened all this up and tried to take a look at it and so forth. So I commend the staff and you, Superintendent Savine, for keeping it in this conservative county. I just don't see how anybody could complain about this budget. I just don't. So.
Thank you, Mr. Stauffer.
I think, and maybe just to follow up on Mr. Stauffer's comment, the one thing I probably should have mentioned, when we look at how the state revenue is projected. There's a lot of assumptions. Of course, under the blueprint, as we've talked about previously, the numbers are a little bit clearer than what they've been previously. It's clearly your enrollment numbers. There are allocations per student that are dictated in the blueprint bill. However, the part that is a little fuzzy is the cost allocation, and in the way the money is allocated between the state and the local share. We have assumed at this point that the state share follows last year's trend. We've only got 1 year of trend data to follow at this point, so we're going with that. It is possible that that trend could shift. If it shifts to more share on the locals, then of course the ask of the locals will go up. If it shifts the other direction, where that share is more on the state government, then our request of the locals could actually go down.
Mr. Frew, I'm on page 7, position needs in FY23. I'm just wondering what 3.4 special education teachers and 7.2 special education paraprofessionals would look like.
I think I'll defer perhaps over to Mr. Sisler, who probably has more intricate data, but it could be that you may have had a part-time position that's become full-time, and
Yeah, the reason for the partial, kind of like the 0.4 positions, we had 1.4 special ed teachers that were in the MA infant toddler grant that we need to bring over to a new funding source. Or actually, they've already moved this year, and we're just accounting for that. That's the reason for some of these partial FTEs that are shown here.
So would it be a full position, but they'd only be paid out of one pot and then in another?
Split funded.
Okay, that's what I thought. That's just want to make sure. And the other question I have is on page 11, and it's about the college and career-ready exam fees, tuition, and book expenses. Those are blueprint costs. Are these unfunded mandates? Is there any money that follows certain students, or are these totally our expense because it was mandated by the blueprint?
there is some money in the budget for college and career readiness that is comes over under the blueprint. However, the cost of the expense far exceeds the value of the revenue for college and career readiness. Some of the justification is, for instance, if you have a student that maybe does a full day at HCC and has never sets foot in their traditional comprehensive high school, is foundation dollars can be used to pay for the college and career readiness because they're not assigned a WCPS teacher. They're not taking up WCPS seats. So the value of college and career ready actually is very thin. It's only a few $100,000 if memory serves me correct. But you can offset that with foundation, assuming the students are taking their full load at HCC.
Okay, thank you.
Or any other institution.
So the 7.9 shortfall includes the investments we're going to make into middle college and HCC.
That's correct. That really is, for lack of a better term, a plug to balance your revenues and expenditures. We're estimating what the state's going to provide. We know what we're doing, with the loss in the federal revenue. We know what our expenses are, and the rest flows into what we would request from the locals to balance the budget.
I think it's important to note that the only body that we have that we can make a request of is the county, that what we get from the state, we can't request more. It's driven by formulas in the law that's already, during the campaign for commissioners, I heard some comments about going back to the state and asking for more support. But once that law is set, those things are all driven by formulas and so forth. And so we don't have any discretion to say, oh, give us another $1 million or something. So then the difference, then the gap falls back to the request to our local commissioners.
And I think follow up to Mrs. Murray's question on college and career readiness, on page 1 of the 41 in the third tab. That's your full composite budget. In the second section, which is the state revenue, about 2/3 of the way down is the college and career readiness line. It's anticipated for FY24 that that's $819,000, but our anticipated expense is north of $2 million.
I just want to add, as I open or closed, I express my gratitude to our team members that collaboratively assisted with preparation of this budget process, but also want to mention the collaborative effort with our county administrator, Mr. Margarano, and as well as our Board of Commissioners president and board members. There's been much communication over the last month plus. I know county revenues, fortunately, are very strong, just like our state revenues are strong. This was not done in isolation. There's been quite a bit of conversation with board leadership and county leadership regarding the needs of the school system. So we appreciate that level of support.
The one thing that does concern me is you spoke to it, the Time to Care Act, without knowing all those details and stuff. I just think that's so unfair for the state to, how can you make a budget when you don't know what impact that's going to be? And I also worry about the impact on the individual contributions on some of our employees who are not, the ESPs and so forth. Especially in these inflationary times.
Thank you, Mr. Stauffer, and that's a great point. And I want to extend my appreciation to this board. Part of your legislative priorities is involving Time to Care Act and a request to hold the school district harmless. You see the significant impact here with our employees as well as the school system. But I do believe and certainly commend the efforts of this board and our legislative team with the advocacy that we've already started, and certainly when the General Assembly starts here in very short order, that will be a point of focus for our team and certainly board leadership. Mr. Pruitt.
Yeah, I think when we looked at the estimate early in the legislation, there was language in the bill that expressed that the rate could not exceed 0.75% of total wages, and that would be split in some variation to not exceed 75% paid by the employee. But it could be any range up to 0.75%. It could be a 50-50 split. It could be 75-25 one way or the other, 60-40. Really not knowing. We sort of took a worst-case scenario, assumed that it would be 0.75%, assumed that the Board of Education would be on the hook for 75% of that expense, and the employee would only be 25%, and generated the estimate of approximately $900,000 in year one because it doesn't begin until October 1. So it's only 3/4 of a first year expense, of a full year's expense, which we estimate to be approximately $1.2 million. Before the bill was passed in the final hours, that language for the cap on 0.75% of total wages was stricken. And if memory serves me correctly, according to the fiscal note, the Secretary of Labor has until approximately April to determine the rates for the coming fiscal year. So while we and all municipal governments and county governments, and as well as the state, are in the blind, we feel it was prudent to make sure we had a significant placeholder. But we may be short. There's really no way to know.
Does that rate have to be then approved by the General Assembly, that the Secretary approves?
No. The Secretary has full control over setting that rate.
Dr. Savine, my question is with regard to the slide, which would be page 8, the position needs going forward into fiscal year 24, the 19 school security assistants. Could we have some more information on what exactly those positions are and how they will impact our students in addition to the school resource officers that we currently have in our system?
Yes, President Williams, board members may recall that here recently, we brought forward to the board a request for school security people that it's staff members that work in a proactive manner to develop strong relationships with students. They are not resource officers. They support the school administrative team. Certainly, our school safety staff provide the training along with our administrators, but it's designed to increase visibility in our schools and to help facilitate students moving into the classrooms in a timely manner. And they're individuals that are designed to provide more proactive safety support in our schools. Right now, we've started the interview and selection process, and these individuals will be in our schools in very short order this year, and the recommendation is to continue that forward for next year. Mr. Pruitt?
I think an additional point of clarification is these are not sworn officers. They are not armed officers. Their role really is building relationships and assisting to keep order, providing additional support, monitoring cameras, doing campus visits, campus tours, both inside the building and outside the building, to maintain a safe environment for our students and staff.
Thank you.
I'll just add to Mr. Prue's comments. Typical example at the beginning of the day at our high schools in the parking lots. These professionals will be in there in the parking lots, ensuring safety, helping students as they transition into school and also as they depart at the end of the day. Certainly class changes it's another critical area, having high visibility along with our teachers, staff members that are devoted to, as Mr. Prue shared, developing strong relationships and encouraging those students that may need a general prod to move on to that classroom. It certainly provides great assistance to our classroom teachers.
We used to have teachers at Williamsport High School who performed those roles before and after school. You had parking lot duty if you didn't have a homeroom. So now we've got full-time people.
Colleagues?
I will say this addition of resource or security assistance is a position that most districts that I'm familiar with have had in place for quite some time to successfully support the needs of our secondary schools and the students. Once again, the goal is to be proactive, to prevent challenging circumstances from occurring so that we can have a productive learning environment and learning culture in all of our schools.
Colleagues, any further questions? No? Dr. Savine, anything further that you'd like to add?
Well, I will say, as I mentioned, I believe this is a true needs-based budget. Recognizing with any budget there are limitations, and being fiscally responsible, as I mentioned, our work closely with the county administrator and the Board of Commissioners leadership. I believe this is a fair, reasonable ask. It is a wise investment in our community, just as our investment in public safety at the county government level, I believe, is a very wise investment. As I mentioned, we did our due diligence. There were a little over $2 million worth of savings there. There are still some remaining opportunities, positions, and for us to even strengthen this budget request. But once again, tried to be very reasonable in terms of addressing our most critical needs and recognizing that we can't do everything in one fiscal year, but I think this is a very good start. And I believe the next fiscal cycle will provide an opportunity for us to continue to strengthen, most importantly, our student classroom environments and address the needs of our students. We recognize that there are a lot of complexities and challenges that students come to us with in providing support in the areas of special ed, mental health needs, and proactive safety and security staff members. I think certainly positions us so that we can continue to lead in many areas, just like we do with preschool. We recognize that's a wise investment. We've heard recently how our kindergarten readiness assessments are some of the strongest in the state of Maryland. The same thing with our apprenticeship program. So as we strategically address our most critical needs, I believe that positions us to best meet our students' needs and to lead as a school district at the state level. So certainly appreciate board members' support, and as well as our staff members, our community that's been engaged in this process. As I mentioned in my opening, I value the input and insight that I received from staff members and the greater community in building this budget proposal.
Thank you, thank you. Colleagues, I'd like to call your attention to the general fund budget calendar that you have in the front pocket of your binder. This work session, January 3rd, 2023, you can see that the entire month of January will be waiting on numbers. Is that correct?
I think that's accurate.
And to know what revenue is. So we have a work session scheduled for the 7th of February, and later that day at our business meeting, there will be a public hearing, and following the public hearing, I believe there's usually an action item for the board to adopt the superintendent's recommended budget as the board's budget.
I think for clarification, Mrs. Williams, that evening of the 7th, the board adopts the draft superintendent's budget as their draft.
And
Then the Budget Advocacy Review Committee begins to work, and you have your public hearing scheduled for Tuesday, March 7th.
Thank you for that clarification.
Also note, when the schedule was first approved, we were looking at a session with the county commissioners on March 14th. It's my understanding they are not meeting on the 14th and requested alternate dates from us. We have tentatively scheduled the 7th for that presentation of the Board of Education's budget to the commissioners.
Commissioners?
So that would be a change to the budget, the approved budget calendar.
So February 7th is a presentation to
The Board
The
of County
commissioners.
Commissioners,
March 7th.
March 7th.
March 7th.
So 1 week earlier than it's on the calendar.
Got it. Got it. Thank you, Mr. Prue, for setting me straight. And this is tentative and fluid and subject to adjustments as needed. Thank you. Colleagues, if we have nothing further by way of questions regarding the budget, and we'll end our work session. Thank you, staff. Thank you, Dr. Savine. Thank you, colleagues.